In this paper, I hope to outline a version of neutral monism motivated by metaphysical considerations concerning the nature of properties. The first section of the paper outlines an account of properties often known as the powerful qualities account, sometimes also as the limit view. It goes on to briefly summarise some core commitments of neutral monism and then outline one way, at least, that one might characterise the division between the physical and the mental. The third section will then elaborate on the version of neutral monism motivated by the observations of sections 1 and 2. Following this, I'll examine the space occupied by this version of neutral monism in the conceptual landscape of the mind-body debate, exploring how it relates to other monisms, both mental and physicalistic, and to dualism and panpsychism. Given time, I'll hope to offer some responses to some objections often raised to neutral monist positions, and perhaps take a brief look at some advantages of adopting this version of neutral monism and some potential areas of applications. So, the powerful qualities view. One of the key debates in the metaphysics of properties concerns whether properties are, fundamentally speaking, dispositional, or whether they are categorical, qualitative, occurrent, various terms used for, I think, broadly the same thing there. Some philosophers argue that all real properties are causal powers or dispositions, or at least that all fundamental properties are, and that if there are any non-dispositional properties, they depend in some sense on the dispositional ones. Others have argued that all real properties are best characterised non-dispositionally, perhaps as categorical, occurrent, or qualitative, or at least that all fundamental properties are of this sort, and that if there are any dispositional properties, they depend in some sense on the categorical or qualitative or occurrent properties. And there are also those who take a mixed view, holding that some real fundamental properties are dispositional, and that other real fundamental properties are categorical or qualitative or occurrent. These three approaches, however, are not exhaustive. A fourth position, the powerful qualities view, agrees in some sense with each of the above positions, whilst also in other senses disagreeing with each of them. It's in agreement with the first view outlined above, that there are no real fundamental properties that fail to bestow upon their bearers certain dispositional features. And it's in agreement with the second view, insofar as that there are no real fundamental properties that fail to bestow upon their bearers certain non-dispositional features. There is also a sense, therefore, in which it agrees with the mixed view, in that it holds that there are real fundamental properties that bestow qualitative features and ones that bestow dispositional features. However, contrary to the mixed view, the powerful qualities account of properties holds that all real properties are both dispositions and, in the preferred term of its proponents, and what I'll use from now on, qualities. Thus, it is not that there are two exclusive classes of properties, the dispositions on one hand and the qualities on another, which are co-fundamental and exist alongside one another, and nor does the fundamentality of the dispositional properties threaten that of the qualitative properties, as the first view holds, nor vice versa do the qualitative properties threaten in some sense the fundamentality of the dispositional properties. Rather, according to the powerful qualities views, all real properties are best characterised as dispositional cum qualitative and qualitative cum dispositional, with no priority afforded to either dispositionality or qualitativity. The notion that all real properties are both dispositional and qualitative is expressed in terms of a surprising identity. Whilst prima facie it might appear that dispositional and qualitative pick out heterogeneous property types, in fact the dispositional is identical to the qualitative and vice versa. Every real property is unitary and simple, and it makes both a contribution to the dispositional nature of the object that bears it. That is, it informs how that object will behave in various circumstances, both actual and possible, and it makes a contribution to the qualitative nature of the object that bears it. Some critics have found such a characterisation of properties hard to conceive. Armstrong and Lowe have both raised this worry with the view, and certainly much could be said about how this surprising identity claim ought to be understood. However, for this talk, I just want to see what happens if we take such a claim at face value. So qualitativity and dispositionality then are real, irreducible and ineliminable features of the world. However, they both find their basis, ontologically speaking, in a single kind of entity, just properties. These properties are ways things in the world are. Any such way that something is will have consequences, both for the way that thing will behave in actual and possible, but currently not actual circumstances, and it will determine some sort of intrinsic qualitative nature of the thing. The property that will be the source of these contributions is unitary, and so these contributions cannot be separated from each other in reality. That is, we could not get rid of the one, we could not get rid of the dispositionality without losing the qualitativity, and vice versa. For to get rid of just one would require us to get rid of the property itself, and so the other would follow. Both the quality and the disposition are identical to the property itself, and so to one another. So neutral monistic views seem to have two central features. The first is the commitment to a monistic ontology, the claim that all fundamental entities are of a single kind or type, and secondly, the neutrality claim, that the nature of that type is such that the fundamental entities are best characterised as neutral between the physical or material on the one hand, and the mental or psychological or experiential on the other. For the neutral monist, physical and mental phenomena may still be considered real, but they are not to be accounted for, ontologically speaking, in terms of phenomena which, but they are to be accounted for, ontologically speaking, in terms of phenomena which are not themselves fundamentally physical or mental. It seems that any view that would incorporate these two commitments is a neutral monist position, and therefore that the position is a relatively flexible theoretical framework. There's room for elaboration in a variety of directions. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the notions of physicality and mentality. It seems to me that any attempt to make headway in debates concerning the ontology of mind and body must offer some relatively substantive characterisation of what the terms mental and the physical are supposed to pick out. Without something like that, it seems hard to make sense of the sort of arguments that physicalists on the one hand and dualists on the other have with one another. And the characterisation I'm going to adopt in this paper is that up on the board under P and M. This isn't my own distinction, it's one that's found in the work of Chalmers or many other people. But broadly speaking, that a property is best characterised as physical insofar as it confers on its bearer a nature which determines the causal and structural relations into which that entity enters, and that it's best characterised as mental if it plays an appropriate role in the causal or explanatory account of behaviour, that is a psychological property, sort of things that are only involved in easy problems, or insofar as it has a qualitative nature which can be part of the content of, or inform or feature in an experience. And given these characterisations, one might schematise the major positions in the debate surrounding the ontology of mind and body in the following ways. So, briefly speaking, I'm just going to try and go through this quite quickly, but physicalist positions would hold that all properties, all fundamental or real properties, are P properties, and that apparent M properties are somehow identical with, or eliminable in favour of, or reducible to, or depend on P properties, depending on the flavour of physicalism. We also have kind of mentalistic monisms, maybe idealisms or phenomenalisms, that would hold that all real properties are M properties, and that apparent P properties are really constituted or something by M properties. Property dualisms would hold that some properties are P properties whilst On the other hand, others are M properties, and neutrally monist positions would hold that neither P or M properly or fully characterise the real fundamental properties. The nature of the real properties is rather neutral between P and M. And the two characterisations, P and M, it seems that dispositionality and qualitativity play a central role in each of these characterisations. Part of what it is for a property to be physical, according to P, is that that property confers some sort of dispositional nature on its bearer. Part of what it is for the property to be mental, according to M, is for that property to have some sort of qualitative nature. And whilst these characterisations may involve more than this, I think it could at least be contended that it's this contrast between, on the one hand, dispositionality, and on the other, qualitativity, that gives the apparent distinction between mind and body ontological bite. So, according to the powerful qualities view, no real property can be fully and properly characterised as either a disposition or as a quality. Rather, properties bestow both a dispositional and a qualitative nature on the objects by which they are instantiated, but these dispositionality and qualitativity are in some sense fundamentally, ontologically speaking, identical to one another. They are accounted for by a unitary and undifferentiated entity, the property itself. One way that this could be put is that properties are neutral between dispositionality and qualitativity, between being best characterised as dispositions or as qualities. So if this view is correct, then the fundamental stuff of the world is neither best characterised as physical, nor is it best characterised as mental. For properties are neither best characterised as P properties, nor are they best characterised as M properties. Ontologically speaking, all reality is composed of entities which are of a kind. Whatever the significant difference exists between the mind and body, it is not one which can be drawn in terms of the nature of the fundamental properties. Such position seems like it may be at odds with how a lot of the debate concerning the ontology of mind and body is drawn today, for it's implicit in many of the major positions, monisms of either physical or mentalistic flavour and dualistic positions, that this distinction ought to be drawn somehow in terms of fundamental ontology. The disagreement, rather, is over the relative ontological priority of the mental and the physical, and over whether or not both actually exists. But if one accepts the powerful qualities view, it becomes hard to see just how the sort of distinction driving this kind of framing of the debate could be drawn. I mean, whether or not one accepts that P and M are sort of perfectly adequate characterisations of physicality and mentality, it's hard to see how one could elaborate on the notion of physicality without drawing on that of causation, behaviour, structure, which seem, at least in some important sense, to be accounted for by dispositionality, or indeed on mentality without phenomenal experience, without something which is a matter of qualitativity, of having some intrinsic what it is likeness. How am I doing for time? 5 minutes. Okay, well, I'm going to skip over the next couple of sections very quickly. But firstly, so one objection that's sometimes levelled at traditional versions of neutral monism is that really neutral monism collapses into some kind of idealism or phenomenalism. Perhaps sort of the source or motivation of this worry has been some of the terms used by kind of the big names in neutral monism, James talking in terms of pure experience, or Russell in terms of sensation and appearance. But it at least looks like a version of neutral monism based on the powerful qualities account oughtn't to fall into this worry. There's no sense in which powerful qualities are sort of picked out by what look like purely kind of mentalistic terms. I think the view can also be distinguished from a kind of the kind of pan-quality type position discussed in Leopold's paper earlier, which holds that the fundamental properties are really qualities that somehow undergird the causal structure of the world, because according to the powerful qualities view, this is going to be an inappropriate characterization of the fundamental properties. They are not qualities that simply undergird dispositions and are somehow more fundamental than them, but are both qualities and dispositions. I think I'll skip, and it ought to be clear that the position isn't going to collapse into a kind of physicalism for similar reasons, nor is it a kind of dualism, which would hold that there were some properties that are P properties and some that are M properties. So I finally want to say a very little bit about the relationship between the version of neutral monism that I've just been suggesting and panpsychist positions. And there's at least, I suppose, the strong version of panpsychism, which would hold that what we have are little experiences or little subjects of experience all the way down. I don't think is implied by a neutral monism based on the powerful qualities account, as long as one's able to accept a distinction between qualities of the thing experienced and experiential qualities themselves, then the view that every property confers on its bearer some sort of qualitative nature oughtn't to imply that for everything there is something it is like to be that thing,